this session, we're going to be talking about this new normal, which is traceability at a product level, both upstream and downstream. And what I wanted to do, so again, I'm Leonardo Bonanni, I'm the founder and CEO of Sourcemap. We specialize in supply chain mapping, which is all that upstream traceability that companies have to do now to reach the raw material producers. And what I wanted to do is bring a longtime partner of Sourcemap's, uh, uh, Nathan Anderson and ScanTrust, to this short conversation to really talk about the combination of the upstream traceability needs and the downstream traceability that ScanTrust is known for. And just as a little bit of context, so we're seeing a lot of use of the word traceability. And so part of this meeting is about disambiguating. What do we mean by traceability? What actually is it? And some people think just knowing your suppliers is traceability. Some people think tracing a product is traceability. But now we're evolving into a world where the regulations actually require you to trace individual shipments because every shipment has a slightly different supply chain, and then to even trace individual lots, batches of production, and then down to serialization, which is this tracing of individual units of product, all the way from the raw material to the end customer, and then even after the customer in sort of a reuse recycle scenario. There are a couple of waves of regulation that are moving us in this direction of product level traceability, namely the digital product passport in the EU, the DPP, and then there's a number of huge industry transitions to serialization through the food and pharmaceutical regulations in the US and in Europe, and notably FSMA. So to kick things off, I just wanted to let Nathan explain sort of why he's here, sort of where does ScanTrust come from, and what got you to this place, and also how long have you been doing this work?
Awesome. Thanks, Leo. And yeah, pleasure to be here finally. I mean, you guys have been doing this for how many years now? Is this 4 or 5? How long? And finally
15. Yeah.
50. No, no, the annual event, the
Oh, this is
transparency
our
conference.
fourth conference. It's been 3 years now.
Yeah, 3 years. Okay, so finally, we've been working together for 5 years. So I remember when you guys launched this, and so I'm happy to finally, I think, first time participating in it as a panelist. I've participated as an attendee before, and so as Leo said, everyone, I'm Nathan Anderson. I'm co-founder and CEO at ScanTrust, and really excited to talk about this upstream, downstream traceability. World, because as Leo points out, traceability can mean many things, and all those can be right. And where we're coming from on the ScanTrust side, so we've built a digital ID enterprise platform to manage the life cycle of data carriers in a way. So QR codes, NFC, RFID, Bluetooth sensors, anything that connects to the internet. We work with them. It's predominantly QR codes for various reasons, including what the legislation is mandating. But essentially, what we believe where we come in on the supply chain is once you have a finished good, a product comes to life, we help make that product be born digital with some sort of digital identity. And then as that physical product moves through the life cycle, we're managing that digital ID and in effect that product as it moves through your internal supply chains, third-party logistics supply chains, retailers, consumers, and again, yeah, that cradle to grave with the recycling that you were referencing as well. And what we've seen and where we started very much on the anti-counterfeiting side. We've been at this for 10 plus years now. We're managing billions of digital IDs and by virtue billions of products any given week across our platform. We started about looking into anti-counterfeiting and stopping fraud that was happening in the supply chain. But we had a vision very early on, and we've seen it come to fruition now, where with one digital identifier, one data carrier, you're able to get multiple business outcomes that help both brands and also other stakeholders throughout the value chain, whether it be anti-counterfeiting, downstream traceability of distributors, how products are moving through your supply chain, engaging with your end customer or consumers directly. And then, of course, increasingly over the past 12 to 24 months, compliance as well. And I guess that brings us to where we are today. And Leo, I know you guys have had compliance, solving the problems of compliance, and the managing this regulatory maze has been with you guys for a while. And I'm just curious, just throw it back to you for a second, is how do you see this new wave of regulations different than ones that have been in place for a while, both whether across upstream and downstream, and the change that's brought?
Yeah, look, I think this is one of the reasons we work well together. So both of our companies have a pretty big focus on following the regulations and then being ahead of them, and then participating in pilots around the upcoming regulations, and then making sure that our customers are set up for success ahead of enforcement. So uh, from the upstream side, so the piece of the supply chain that goes from the raw material to manufacturing, we've been very busy for the last 4 years tracking, on the U.S. side, the forced labor regulations, and on the European side, the due diligence and the deforestation regulations. And I guess that what would have been unthinkable 10 years ago is that, when supply chain mapping was something you could barely do once a year for internal reporting reasons, is that these regulations are requiring traceability at the shipment level, and in many cases that means smaller than even a batch of goods, because it's essentially become part
Right.
of what it takes to clear customs. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you can share a lot about this, but uh, what that represents from us, from our point of view, is just a shift in the amount of data, a shift in the responsiveness of the suppliers, a shift in the uh, uh, auditability requirements. And so, well, by the way, for clarification, so for us, mapping is really just knowing who's in the supply chain. But traceability means for that individual shipment, having all the receipts, all the proofs of purchase and transfer of goods and money between all the actors in the supply chain for that particular shipment. It's what we're seeing CBP ask for
So
when
you're
they
seeing a
want to
big
see
movement
evidence.
from mapping to traceability. It's extending deeper into the upstream supply chain,
That's right.
these new
That's right.
regulations. Yeah.
And it's not as far as you go. It's not serialization, but it's almost. In
Yeah.
fact, I think you can speak to that, some of that a little bit now. Basically,
Yeah.
because we know mapping is sort of a static exercise. You only add and remove a few suppliers a year. Traceability is a continuous thing. Every time a shipment
Right.
crosses customs,
Events
you
are
have to
happening
have a
all the
different trace.
time.
That's right. But then it gets
Yeah.
even more accelerated once you shift to the downstream. I mean, where are you seeing the volume of
Sure.
data? Where are you seeing serialization play a role
Yeah.
in all this?
Well, I mean, it's really just an extension, right? So I mean, when people use traceability as this catch-all word for upstream, downstream, various aspects in the supply chain, it's all correct, but there are nuances as you move along the supply chain, and really what we've seen it evolve into. Even before it was called digital product passport, we saw a lot of pull from a lot of industries, whether it was the apparel industry, food and beverage industry, where more conscious consumers were driving brands to share more information. And essentially, what we saw was, once a product was born, you're adding some sort of digital identifier, and you're starting to tag information from the upstream. So, and it can come from various different sources. They could come from Sourcemap. They could come from an ERP system. They could come from, a CSV. I've seen them come from someone's handwritten notes, right? That then get added to the product. They come from blockchain, if so be it. And then what was happening up and before these regulations on the downstream side, um, you saw traceability in two forms. One, which I would put into like a product transparency category, where you're tying together the history of the product, and then you're making that information shareable to consumers. Scan a QR code, open up a web page where it tells you the story of that product, its origin and provenance. And these, up until these newer DPP regulations, these were very much, I think, was brand awareness, marketing driven campaigns, of varying degrees of qualities. We've seen some greenwashing in there, and of course, the green claims legislation, the EU is looking to clamp down on that. And so that is using traceability information to create product transparency campaigns. And then the other side that we saw, which of traceability that happens, is understanding, okay, now we ship a product. Most companies, we produce a product, we're marketing it to our end consumers, but between our distribution centers and the final end customer, there's multiple steps along the way, wholesalers, distributors, sub-distributors, retailers, and they lose track of that product. And so from that perspective, traceability can also mean gaining better insight on how your product is moving through supply chains to understand better inventory, gain better efficiency, working better with your distribution channels, handling God forbid product recalls if you have them. But really, yeah, the DPP is now pushing specifically that product transparency side of marketing, making it a mandate to do. And what it's creating, I think it creates a lot of opportunities for brands, but obviously it's taking it much further than what people had in mind in the past with for marketing campaigns. And we're seeing that the biggest challenge data, because ultimately it's a regulation that is about adding comprehensive product information to an item or batch level, depending on the industry. And so what you really have here is a data play, how to bring data from many different sources together, link it to one unit. And to your point, it's not just static. As a product moves through the supply chain, the attributes related to it change and are added along the way. So you very much need a flexible and interoperable system to that. And I have to imagine that on the upstream side, though, for a while, when you talk about just even the mapping exercise, and then certainly traceability side, the aspects of interoperability have been at play for a while at that. And I'm sure, curious to know, like, are you seeing an evolution now on the need for interoperability, or how should I be thinking about this when I'm starting to map and collect this traceability data? How important is interoperability to all of this?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're seeing when you shift from mapping once a year to mapping every single shipment, collecting all that transaction data,
Right.
you can't do it, certainly can't do it by hand anymore. So what we're seeing is a need for interoperability on the upstream side. It's mostly ERP. It's mostly getting those purchase orders out
Yeah.
of SAP,
Deep dark
triggering.
recesses of some module.
It is, and
Yeah.
oftentimes every
Yeah.
every manufacturing plant has a different ERP installed. So
Right.
getting all of those into one feed so that we can collect the traceability data appended to each shipment. So there's a big ERP integration. There's also integration with some testing providers, satellite data providers, life cycle assessment providers. So we're having to source the best data to verify, for example, for DPP, the footprint calculation of the product. So all of that is happening through APIs. Thank God we're in the cloud. We're in the secure
Right.
enterprise cloud, so we can actually make these exchanges of data happen. We can make the process automatic, at least for the company requesting the data from their supply chain, and we can make that assessment. But then there's this, people have been talking for years about this idea of tracing product from raw material all the way to end of life.
Yeah.
But it's clear to me the stakeholders are totally different, right? The people who buy supply chain mapping and traceability are on the procurement and compliance side of the organization. The people taking care of downstream are in
Right.
operations, manufacturing, all the way to distribution, sale, marketing. And so right now, there also needs to be a very tight interoperability between who takes care of the upstream data and the downstream data. They really meet in the middle in a very, very thin layer. And that's one of the reasons we're talking
Yeah,
today.
of course. Yeah, no, well, that's why we started working together, and it's really starting to come to that. I mean, now we, just like yourself, we've implemented several, we'll call it DPP light projects now. And what you see is that without that interoperability, without that automation of various tools being able to interact together, you're increasing the cost of implementing or maintaining the system. You're running risks that data is not updated and associated when it's supposed to, thus being not compliant in the future. And so really what we see is same on the upstream side, is that this interoperability is key to really create a solution that is scalable and able to meet the needs of your compliant and stay compliant. And, I think what I'd like, to expand on, we touched on DPP for a while. I feel like it's, for those Game of Thrones fans, it's kind of like there's a famous family says, winter is coming, the Starks family. It's kind of, I feel like for years now I've heard DPP is coming, and it's finally here now that the ESPR regulation was passed in June. But now each of the industries, from apparel to electronics, lubricants, cosmetics, there's 30 or odd categories it covers. Each of where we're at right now is each of these industries will need to have a delegated act, which will give more specifics. So we have this umbrella regulation of the ESPR, which outlines certain things that are going to impact every single company and industry that is forced to comply with this. But now we will have to wait to know for certain exactly what the regulations are, and most of that won't come into effect until 2026, 2027, or at least be known to 2026 and start to be compliant in 2027. But like I said, what we're seeing is the need to really start to get ahead of this. And because of the complexity of the data that we've talked about across upstream and downstream, the importance to start getting various actors in your company involved. This is not something that just, hey, sustainability team, go figure it out, supply chain director, go figure it out, or whoever, because it touches on so many aspects of the business, and there's data coming from aspects of the business, and it's requiring this QR code to go on product. So now you're communicating with consumers, from IT to supply chain to sustainability to marketing and other departments. They all need to get involved, and beyond just mapping your supply chain, like what you guys do at Sourcemap, you have to map your gaps. And what we're finding with some of the DPP light projects we're launching, they're going to have to evolve and be iterated to be compliant as the regulation comes out. But you start to once you go live with a small project, after mapping your gaps and testing something out, you very quickly realize where your gaps are. And we've done projects where you're talking about 75,000 SKUs printed across 30 factories with various, add exponential number of suppliers and raw material inputs to each one of those factories. And what we're seeing is that companies that have this level of complexity or even less, if you wait till the regulations are there, you're going to be scrambling to get compliant in the short period of time once it's all finalized, because those gaps are going to exist with or without the final delegated acts.
Yeah, look, I think we know DVP won't hit for a couple more years,
Yeah, 2 years.
but at
Yeah,
the same time, even with the delays we've seen in other regulations and late adopters, there's a lot of preparation that should be done before compliance is even possible. And for
right.
us, that's all about getting the suppliers ready to provide this data. Even if you're doing life cycle assessment, even if you're, assessing pretty mainstream aspects, what is the composition of these products? What is their end of life scenario? You need to get all the stakeholders around the table and
Right.
conversant and fluent and able to provide the data. You need to start to run some assessments before enforcement to identify any issues that would need remediation, corrective action, audits, and the like. And you really need, I mean, as you know, because you started this in a sort of a fraud prevention counterfeiting issue. There's going to be parts of the supply chain that are more opaque than others. There's going to be
Oh
data
yeah.
that can be trusted more or less. There's going to be assertions that are documented and the ones that aren't. And the combination of DPP and the claims laws means any kind of e-labeling, any kind of a product declaration needs to be verifiable completely. So it's not
Right.
public, but companies need to be prepared with an audit trail of data to back up their assertions about the environmental impact of a product, about the composition, about the end of life
Yeah.
claims, and all of
Absolutely.
that. Yeah, all of that
And
is
and
a lot
not
of
not only do you have to be
preparation.
prepared. I mean, just segueing on that is now, and one thing we do know that's going to be part of the DPP framework is this concept of a DPP registry. So of course, each company needs to keep a backup of their data, which upon request from a national authority to provide it. But there is going to be a decentralized DPP registry, which everyone needs to put this data. on, and it's going to be accessible for time immemorial as well. And so, whether you want to share your information or not, it's going to be out there, right? And to all your point, those steps of running those assessments before enforcement and understanding the quality of the data going in are even more important. So how are we doing on time, Leo?
We're doing pretty great. Look, I got a couple
Okay.
more, things I wanted to cover, but basically, you know, latest and greatest. Like, what is something that, people could achieve today that you've already been doing that our audience here might not be aware is actually already possible in terms of downstream traceability.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll leave a lot of the upstream side to you to talk to about. I think from the downstream side, if I could summarize it up in one word, is to think beyond compliance. In general, what we are seeing is, if we were having this conversation 5 years from now, regardless of whether an industry is regulated by DPP or not, it's highly probable that your products are going to have some sort of digital identifier, likely in the form of a QR code on it. This is not just because of DPP regulation, but we're also seeing movements with GS1, for example, with the GS1 digital link industry standards, which is moving from that 1D barcode that's been part of our lives in supermarkets for years, beep, beep, beep. That's getting transitioned to a QR code. They're targeting 2027 with this, and a lot of the big retailers are already behind this initiative. And, so what's going to happen is that all products are going to have this digital foundation, whether for compliance purposes or for providing more value to your brand, whether it's through product traceability, anti-counterfeiting, or engaging with your consumers. And this is something you don't need regulations to start, to make you do something about it. You can start now, and like everything, you're going to iterate. You're going to find different products, different regions are going to get different values and find different value off of a digital identifier. And also, there's going to be different, compliance legislation in place. And so, once you start getting this digital identifier on your product, it really opens up an opportunity to start testing and finding out what works for your brand, what works for your stakeholders in your value chain, to start extracting more value from your product and interacting with you directly as a brand. And so that's why I put it out as I think this is really an opportunity for many brands. Yes, there's this compliance purpose, and it's like, oh, great, we got to comply just so we can sell our goods. But there is this whole other, channel and way to drive value for businesses and your customers via digital identifiers.
Hey, by the way, just indulge me for a second. Nerd
Yep.
out on serialization,
Okay.
which
Yeah.
I think people heard about first from pharmaceuticals, where every vial,
Right.
every dose has its own unique serial number. Uh, why is so? If I'm a bulk product, manufacturer, I make huge volumes of
Mhm.
clothing or food. Why would I ever need serialization?
Sure. Yeah. So, okay. So, right. So there's like three levels, right? There's SKU level identifier. This is just, the same, like the 1D barcode, the classic old GTIN where, the same ID across a whole SKU. Then you can have batch level serialization, which is for a specific production lot or batch. You're identifying that particular, lot of goods and changing that for each lot. And then serialization, each and every item down to, the item level has a unique identifiers. And, what we see, of course, is the complexity of getting a unique identifier across each of those stages. It increases as you go from SKU level to batch to unit level. And one of the big barriers for many years of going unit level was the cost of doing serialization. Over the last few years, we've seen significant advancements in digital printing, which is lowering that cost. It's not zero, but the cost of that has come down significantly. So we're seeing more serialization. But why do we see serialization happening when it's happened? Let's look at through as you said, geek out from the lens of regulation and also just general, how your products are moving through the supply chain. If you have batch level, products, what this means is you are only able to apply data uh, almost in a static way. It's not very dynamic, meaning that if there's information that's updated or if products from different batches get crossed over during the wild of the supply chain. For example, very often we see, a pallet will go out of your distribution center. It will go of your DC, go to another distribution center. The pallets need to be, reworked and reordered, and very often products will be mixed and matched together. So then you all of a sudden have products from different batches that are collected together, and there's really no way to update information properly and accurately across each and every product. So if you were trying to comply with TPP, comply to say FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act regulations, or you're trying to add important data like which distributor is this going to, or what's its intended market, and trace it, you're not able to do that with batch level data. Serialization allows you to do that because effectively, because it's at an item level, no matter how you reorganize that unit, whether it's by itself, whether it's going into a case, whether it's a case going into a pallet, creating some parent hierarchy, you're able to have that flexibility to really at any point adapt and adjust, event level tracking on that individual item. And what we're seeing is there's tremendous amount of business efficiency unlocks on this in terms of what it can do to help you optimize your inventory, improve product recalls, optimize your downstream operations. And then from a compliance perspective, even though some of the regulations look like they'll only be batch level, if you don't have serialization in place, it's depending on how your workflows are in your supply chain, you probably won't be able to comply due to this rework process that I mentioned. So serialization is coming. The good news is that the cost to do it and the ability to do it has changed significantly over just the past few years, which is good timing for the world we're moving into in the coming years.
And serialization is coming. Shipment level traceability is already here. The combination of the two is so powerful because we
Yeah,
don't have to be stuck with a static map. If there's a recall, you can pinpoint exactly what upstream supplier
right,
the contamination was tied to. Yeah, if there's any kind of deforestation risk or anything, any non-compliance, you can really narrow the envelope of responsibility immediately. You know, pull that out, correct it. So it really makes the supply chain honestly a lot more efficient, productive, and you don't have to be stockpiling so much. I mean, we're seeing the same thing because our customers have hundreds of thousands of suppliers, hundreds of
right,
thousands. And so being able to tie a smaller group of suppliers to a single shipment means so much more control over the quality, the authenticity, and the compliance of the whole supply chain. Um, Great. Look, Nathan, it's been a pleasure. I think I'm going to take a quick beat before the next session, but
sure.
I can't thank you enough. ScanTrust always a very future-looking partner. That they were working on this 10 years ago, and they knew that serialization was around the corner, and here we are. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much. And as always, we'll record this, make it available, and would be able to answer any questions offline.